You feel like you are free. Free to like the color blue more than red. Free to cross the street when you want to. Free to do your taxes. You feel like you chose to watch this video. I disagree. In fact, I don't think you're free at all. I think that free will is an illusion. Not exactly a trick of the mind, but an evolved sense that doesn't reflect the reality of what happens in a human brain. The consequences of this revelation aren't as dire as some make it seem, but I do believe that losing free will may change you. It might make you a more compassionate, moral person. But whether or not this actually happens isn't for me to decide. Or you, for that matter.
The argument against free will, mercifully, is simple. No need for fancy philosophy or religious doctrine or quantum mechanics. I ask you only to follow what I call the great causal chain. That is, if you start where you feel the most free and trace causality as far back as you can, I don't think you'll find any room for the conscious decision-making that defines free will. Think about what you want to have for dinner tonight. This is an easy demonstration of your freedom of will, right? Chicken or salmon, pasta or dumplings, it's all up to you. But when we say you, who do we mean? Well, you are your mind. And the mind is everything your brain is doing at this moment. Whether you end up at chicken or dumplings, it will be your neurology, your neurotransmitters and how they move about that decides. Now attempt to follow more links on the great causal chain. You chose dinner. Okay. When did you choose your mind that chose dinner? Did you choose the environment your mind developed in? The nutrients it had access to when you were growing up? The pollution it incorporated? The other minds it interacted with? When did you choose the DNA that made your mind in the first place? Or indeed the random mutations that went into that DNA when your parents got together? Who decided how wealthy your family was, where they lived, and when? Going back another link, did your parents have any of the choices in this chain that you did not? Or their parents? Or their parents? And so on. If your thoughts and intentions and actions are the product of your mind, then the mind emerges from the billions of neurons firing in your brain, and your brain developed under a myriad of conditions that it didn't choose. Where is free will? The great causal chain goes all the way back, and I mean all the way back. Back to the first humans, back to the first common ancestor with chimpanzees, back to the first multicellular organisms, back to the first atoms in the universe. To say that you could have decided differently, that you were free to choose that which you didn't, is to say that the first atoms in the universe could have combined differently, that the first organisms on Earth could have evolved differently, that your parents could have met at a different time or place, or not at all, that you could have had a different brain than you have right now. But none of that happened. The universe is what it is. You made the choices you made, and the conscious you had nothing to do with it.
I know that you don't feel this way. You don't feel beholden to the electrical thunderstorm in your head, no matter whether or not you had a say in where it came from or its genetic lineage. But I submit to you that this is the free will illusion. An illusion because you actually do feel this way. You just never notice it. With a little attention, you can see that what you feel like is decision-making is actually just post hoc rationalization of cognitive chaos.
If you really do choose your choices, how do those options arrive? Let's take a moment to pay close attention to how your choices actually happen. Close your eyes. I want you to choose a major city, anywhere in the world. Calm your mind and choose a city. A city like Dublin, or Cairo, or New York, or Shanghai, or Caracas, or Kyiv. Some of you are now probably having the sensation of remembering that Dublin exists, and that is now influencing your choice. You initially had an explosion of options in your mind, and now you are thinking about certain parts of the world, but I'll stop interfering. Decided? Good. Now open your eyes. I want you to honestly think about how this process just went. When I asked you to think of a city, many options came to mind. Then, for whatever reason, those options were narrowed down. Why? Sure, you can think of a reason in retrospect. You vacationed in Dublin once, or you have a sister in New York. But be honest, you have no idea why these conditions popped up, do you? Why didn't you think of a city like Christchurch, a place you've always wanted to visit? Why didn't you think of Burundi, a city you've never heard of? You're not free to choose the cities that you don't randomly pop into consciousness, are you? And you're not free to choose the cities that you don't know already. The point of this is to try to find the bottom level of your choices. But even for something as simple as choosing any place in the world, you cannot account for what options you thought of, and cannot account for what factors decided between them. You were not free to choose that which you didn't think of, and at no point did you decide what not to think of. If you're having a hard time with getting to the bottom of your attention like this, try it again with another simple question. Close your eyes and think of a family member, or any model of car, or any number. In every case, you will find that your choices, decisions, and their justifications simply appear in consciousness. Why did you think of your brother? Or a Honda Accord? Or 47,203? Pay close enough attention to the next thought you think, and you will see that you have no more conscious control over it than you have over the next word that I say, or indeed the next word that you hear.
Now use your newfound attention skills and try to interrogate everything else you feel like you have freedom over. When did you decide to scratch your nose with your left hand instead of your right? When you were hungry, when did you decide you wanted a chicken Caesar salad and not a burger? When did you decide to get angry when you were cut off in traffic? When did you decide to do that extra rep at the gym when you didn't have to? When did you decide to understand the words that I'm saying to you now?
Think of consciousness like a thunderstorm, with random flashes of lightning seemingly appearing out of nowhere, under no control. Some streaks hit the ground, others reach off into the sky. The cloud doesn't choose which. Your brain is like the thundercloud, a complicated mass of electrons and water producing strong electric signals almost randomly. A flash of intention here, a streak of opinion there, a shock of motor movement somewhere else. Some hit the ground, others don't. In this analogy, what you act on, what you feel like you choose, is no more controlled than where the lightning strikes, when, where, how many times. Now imagine that a thunderstorm was somehow conscious, that there was a feeling of what it was like to be a thundercloud. Knowing what we know about how thunderclouds form, and how lightning strikes, how all of that happens in what geographic locations, at what height off the ground, with what temperature, with what moisture content, with what voltage, across what distance, with what velocity, would you believe a thunderstorm if it told you that it chose to strike a certain place at a certain time? This analogy isn't perfect, of course. Lightning isn't truly random. It strikes in some parts of the world more than others, and it strikes certain objects more than others. Lightning is constrained to the conditions of the atmosphere, the cloud, of electromagnetism, etc. But your brain is similarly constrained. You may not ever have thoughts or intentions outside that which a kilogram of interconnected water meat inside a silent simian's skull could physically produce. But within the range of electric potential your brain can have, if you pay attention, thoughts, ideas, intentions, and actions just appear like lightning. Human brains are more complicated than thunderstorms, maybe the most complicated volumes in the universe. But you have no more reason to think that a brain has free will than that brilliant flicker of lightning does, sparkling in the dark cloud in the distance. You might now be thinking about decisions like self-improvement. What's the point? Well, I just happen to have the kind of brain that will still recommend it to you.
Today's video is sponsored by Trainwell. Gamers, I'm award-winning science educator and totally in control of my own thoughts and actions, Kyle Hill. As of the publishing of this video, I have been using today's sponsor, Trainwell, every single day for an entire year. Why? Because it's just that good, baby. Let me tell you about it. Trainwell, formerly Copilot, is a one-on-one personalized training service that gamifies convenient fitness to keep you consistent. Take a quiz, get assigned a coach, and then start cranking out guided workouts adjusted to your goals, schedule, available equipment, and injuries. For example, my personal coach, Rod, adjusts my workout after every session, is always available via chat in the app, and keeps me consistent. He knows that I have an injured hamstring, for example, from rock climbing, and so we've been slowly strengthening it 3 times a week for the last 50 weeks in a row. That's right, I've been using Trainwell for the last year straight, and I'm pretty sure you can tell the difference. This gamified approach to fitness has changed my health significantly. Take the quiz right now to find your perfect trainer and get 14 days of free training right here on me. I don't think I'm ever gonna stop using this app, to be honest. It's that good. Hey, everyone can train, but not everyone knows how to train well. That's Trainwell. Elongate yourself along the x-axis.
If it's true that we don't have free will, it's simultaneously true that we all feel like we do. I haven't believed in free will for a long time, but I would never deny that it feels like I make choices. For the sake of continuing a casual conversation, I'd say that I decided to write this video. I too labor under the illusion. I can hold this discrepancy in my mind because an intuitive belief in free will appears to be hardwired. Biologists like Roy F. Baumeister and his colleagues have argued that the feeling of a free will has been evolutionarily beneficial to us as highly social primates. When we feel responsible for our thoughts and actions, and hold our fellow humans accountable for theirs, group cooperation and rule following and norm maintenance becomes possible. Whether free will is true or not, Baumeister says, having a strong intuitive belief in it would seem to facilitate social harmony, and the cognitive capacities necessary for it seem to be likely evolutionary adaptations to aid in group cooperation. The feeling of free will is hard to shake because it's your default state. Evolution wove the feeling into your DNA. But it's not that hard to find times when we clearly don't feel free, when we seem hopelessly compelled by completely random thoughts and actions. Take the example of cravings. I don't know about you, but sometimes I just need fast food. I don't know what lack of nutrients or dopamine or both caused this specific craving, but I know I'm going to get a cheeseburger and fries today. I might not know when or where from, but I've already given myself up to that decision. Pregnant women are famously subject to the whim of cravings. We might be able to say that biologically, requests for odd foods at odd times could be driven by what the mother and fetus need nutritionally, but why pickles at 5 a.m.? Why not pickled chips at 12 p.m.? It's a silly example with larger implications. Like you thinking of Dublin and not Cairo in our experiment, there are many times when we can't consciously account for what we want and what we choose. Feeling decidedly unfree can also be one of the most pleasurable states to be in. Take the phenomenon known as flow state, when intentions and actions happen automatically, with almost no conscious effort. Maybe you're writing a book and the words just tumble out of you in the right order. Maybe you're playing the guitar and the song you've been practicing for years effortlessly comes together. Maybe you're a gymnast executing a routine that people didn't even think was possible. Being locked in like this feels amazing. Flow is a complete, energized, enjoyable focus. No thoughts, head empty. It's only when consciousness intrudes on your flow that you pause or make a mistake. Only when you exercise your apparent free will.
You have an innate sense of free will. It likely evolved to help foster and maintain highly social cooperative groups. It's our default state, but it's not the only one. This is obvious when we can't explain our desires, or when we revel in the joy of being fully locked in. Whether or not you feel free, then, seems to depend on factors outside of your conscious control. You are beholden to your biology. This is most obvious in the most tragic examples.
The first mass murder to unfold live in the era of mass media happened on August 1st, 1966. After killing his wife and mother earlier that day, a one Charles Whitman dressed up as a worker and ascended a clock tower at the University of Texas. After killing 3 more people, he barricaded himself on the observation deck and then started firing a footlocker full of weapons down at random people. 90 minutes later, Charles Whitman was killed by police. 14 people were dead, 31 wounded. Whitman's suicide note read as follows: "I don't quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. I don't really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts." The note went on to request an autopsy after he was killed. "I never could quite make it. These thoughts are too much for me," Whitman wrote. The next day, an autopsy revealed a pecan-sized brain tumor pushing on Whitman's amygdala. This tragic story was unbelievable at the time. Today, it's commonplace. All too many examples of deformations of the brain leading to unthinkable behavior, unprecedented behavior, unfree behavior. Most people would say that these heinous acts weren't the men's fault. They were victims of biology. But when biology is all there is, where is there room for any inner working of the brain to not be attributable to circumstances that no one controls? Are you not also the victim of the brain you just happen to have? Aren't you just lucky enough that you don't have overwhelming psychotic delusions? We already tend to view other intelligent mammals this way, beholden to biology. As silly as it sounds, I have the intuition from memes like Harambe that most of you don't want a wild animal shot and killed for what comes to it naturally. Poles find the same. If a gorilla attacks you, or a shark bites you, or a bear mauls you, is it really the animal's personal, moral fault? Again, I think most of you would say no. Isn't the deadly animal just like the man with a brain tumor? A bear simply has a bear's brain, right? And does what a bear does. On October 5th, 2003, documentary filmmaker Timothy Treadwell was killed and almost fully eaten by a brown bear, as was his girlfriend. 6 minutes of the attack was captured on audio and featured in the 2005 documentary film Grizzly Man by Werner Herzog. Treadwell was an environmentalist and founder of a bear protection organization. Of course, this didn't matter to the bears. Unlike Harambe, sympathy for Treadwell is hard to find. It's a tragic story, especially combined with the legitimately disturbing testimony from Werner Herzog, who for some reason decided to listen to Timothy being eaten alive. But it's not a surprising story.
Truly, you must never listen to this.
Bears are victims of their biology, and no matter how much you love them or advocate for them or spend time with them, eventually, they will be bears. We understand the wildness of other animals intuitively, so much so that we will even go back to work with them after losing an arm, or almost losing a life. We justify this because we know it's not the animal's fault. The point of all of this is to say that it's not your fault either. We understand that a person isn't free when there's a tumor pressing on some critical part of their brain, just as we understand the actions of a tiger or bear. But the normal structure and function of your brain, neither of which you chose or decided, is as determinant of your choices as a brain tumor is. Completely. We are victims of biology all.
Without free will, or in accepting its non-existence, it's often claimed that the world will turn to chaos, that people will turn into nothing better than barbarians. If no one is truly accountable for their actions, how can we feel morally justified in punishing them for what they do? I agree. How could we feel that way?
Returning to the evolutionary view, it makes sense that we want people to be punished. It arguably helps highly social animals like us enforce norms and rules and maintain the group. But if you're not responsible for your actions, as I claim, does it make sense to physically or mentally harm societal transgressors? There doesn't seem to be anything morally incorrect about separating harmful members of society from the rest of us. If they are unfortunate enough to be psychopaths, you wouldn't want them around your family or your community, and a physical barrier like a jail cell is as sensible as a barrier between a grizzly bear and the children at the zoo. It does seem morally incorrect, however, to want to inflict physical pain, in the case of the death penalty, and or mental anguish, in the case of solitary confinement, on a person who is simply unlucky enough to have the brain that they do, to have the desires and the delusions and dangerous intentions that they do, through no fault of their own. The non-existence of free will doesn't appear to immediately lead to the total collapse of our legal system, which is fundamentally based on the freedom of will, as many claim. In fact, acknowledging the reality of the human brain may in fact benefit the industrial punishment apparatus. Moral progress is already being made on death row, in solitary confinement, and on other punishments that feel cruel and all too usual. The only thing that is stopping us from extending this progress from the most heinous crimes all the way down to the most basic misdemeanors is the illusion that every person is directly and personally and morally responsible for every thought they could possibly have and every action they could possibly take. Nature versus nurture is an outdated idea. Modern biology knows that it's both. It matters what your genes are, but it also matters where you buy your genes from, how your neurons are connected and how you connect with your parents, how your cells run your genetic code, and what kind of friends you run with. If brain tumors and growing up in bad areas are both completely understandable reasons why someone's behavior is determined, if it makes sense not to cuddle with grizzly bears, there is no logical reason for us not to extend this determinism to all behaviors and all actions. Nature has nurtured you, hopefully more positively, in the exact same way. You are simply lucky enough to be you. Some philosophers, like the late Dan Dennett, have pointed out places where free will could still be hiding in a deterministic universe. It's a simple fact that you, as an organism, make decisions. You decide to go to the gym, to prefer chocolate to vanilla, to say GIF instead of GIF, even though one of those is incorrect. This is true, but this isn't free will as it's being argued against. A beetle, too, decides to crawl over the twig instead of underneath it. The difference is that we feel that we have the conscious ability to choose our choices. This feeling is an illusion, for all the reasons that we've gone through. Could free will be hiding in some of the more mysterious spots in science? What about quantum mechanics? Well, I don't think there's any room for freedom here either. Even if it does turn out that quantum randomness is critical to consciousness, you have no more control over these probabilistic outcomes than you have control over the results of God's tumbling dice. Even the experiments that prove free will doesn't exist aren't really important to the basic causal argument. It's been shown, for example, that if you lay a human down in an fMRI and ask them to click a button when they first feel an inkling of a decision on some simple task, there is some unconscious brain activity recorded that precedes the button press. This has been interpreted in the popular media as the brain deciding before the conscious self decides, thereby showing that the feeling of free will is just that, a feeling. These experiments are often used as the ammunition by unbelievers in the free will debate, but in truth, they are a red herring. Even if they demonstrated the opposite, no significant brain activity before a person reports themselves consciously aware of deciding, it still wouldn't show how someone decided to decide. No matter when and where the fMRI flares up, inserting free will into the colorful activity on screen always creates a problem of infinite regress. If you decided, when did you decide to start deciding? When did you choose to choose to choose? Unlike the great causal chain, these links lead back to nothing. For free will to exist, in the way that we feel like it does, requires more than fancy philosophy or quantum mechanics. You would need a truly separate entity, unlinked from the great causal chain, that was in no way a product of nature or nurture, something that could decide before decisions were made, and think of thoughts never thunk. In our current understanding of the physical universe, we have no reason to believe that such a homunculus exists, or could exist. Our naive dualism and evolved sense of self makes it feel like it could, But I think if you engage honestly with everything we've gone through so far and pay attention to your own brain, that feeling fades away, if it doesn't totally disappear. This argument is usually framed as losing something, if it's indeed an illusion, as I claim. But I believe you can gain from losing free will. It has made me a more compassionate person, both to myself and to others. If I am but a historian of my feelings and intentions and actions, how can I really get lost in regret? I happen to be the kind of organism that did the things that I did. I no longer assault my psyche with what could have been. And truthfully, I have used this revelation to ease many painful events in my life. I believe I'm a kinder person to myself. Of course, I just also happen to be the kind of person that considered this argument and changed as a result, and told others about it. Losing free will has also made me more compassionate for other people that I otherwise wouldn't have any compassion for. How can I hate the murderer, or the abuser, or the criminal for simply being unlucky enough to be them? I can and absolutely do think they should be separated from society depending on their crimes, but I'd also say the same thing about sharks and beaches. To me, it doesn't make moral sense to inflict physical and mental harm and anguish and torture on these unfortunate people, no more than it makes sense to shoot the gorilla, who has a natural curiosity towards small gorilla-shaped objects that fall into its enclosure. Losing free will in this way forces compassion in uncomfortable places, places where often the most moral growth is needed.
In the end, I'd be the first person to admit that whether or not we have free will, it doesn't really matter. The illusion is strong enough, even in unbelievers like me, that I don't think it would make a dent outside of academia if I produced a mathematical proof of its non-existence. Still, if it's the pursuit of truth that we're ultimately after in science, then that truth is worth pursuing and trying to come to terms with, no matter how unintuitive and mentally destabilizing it may be. Of course, whether or not any of this will land with you isn't for me to decide. Or you, for that matter. Until next time.
And again, free will or not, I'm still the kind of human that recommends personal training. Take the Train Well quiz to find your perfect trainer and get 14 days of free training on me right now. Thanks for watching.